Unions. We hear about them on television, read about them in newspapers. But most of us don't really know much about unions, who they are, what they do, or how they work. Since a union is now trying to become your legal representative, there's a lot of information about unions you need to know. First, let's look at some facts about unions. A union is a business. They don't make a product. They don't sell a product. But like any other business, unions need to make money in order to operate. And how do unions make their money? Simple. They charge dues to their members. The amount of money they charge each member multiplied by the number of members the union has equals the amount of money each union makes. Now what this means, of course, is that the more members a union has and the more money it can charge each member, the more money the union has to spend. If a union starts to lose members, it begins to get less and less money. Let's look at what has happened to union membership over the last few years and see why the unions are working so hard to try to sign up new members. This chart clearly shows what has happened to union membership in recent years. And remember, fewer members result in less dues and less money. Unions in general are doing very badly. In 1954, unions represented over 32% of the workforce in the United States. That number gradually declined between 1955 and 1975. Then, between 1975 and today, the number has decreased dramatically, so that now unions represent only 16.8% of the workforce. Why is union membership decreasing? Lots of reasons, really. Layoffs in unionized industries, plant closings where unions used to represent the employees, lost elections and decertifications, people kicking the union out. What this means is that unions are rapidly losing members and now have fewer and fewer people from whom they can collect dues. So if they want to stay in business, they need to increase their membership. Why are unions so interested in more money? And how do unions spend the money they collect in dues? Well, let's look at a typical union and find out. Each year, every union has to file a form with the United States Department of Labor stating how much money they took in and how that money was spent. The form is sort of like your income tax return and is called an LM-2. In this case, the union collected over $6 million in dues from members during the year. The union paid over $3 million of that, or 50.5 cents of every dollar collected from its members, to its officers and employees in salaries, salaries of union bosses, and special friends of the union bosses. $500,000, or 8.3 cents of every dollar collected from its members, went for office expenses. $300,000, or 6.2 cents of every dollar collected from its members, went for publicity. $850,000, or 13.9 cents of every dollar collected from its members, went for benefits to union officials, such as cards and expense accounts. $264,000, or 1.7 cents of every dollar collected from its members, went for miscellaneous expenses. And finally, over $1 million, or 17.3 cents of every dollar collected from its members, went to pay the union's taxes. Now, what all this adds up to is that 97.9 cents of every dollar the union collected from its members went to benefit the union, not the union members. If you want a similar return on your money, you would probably be better off with a lottery ticket. But someone has to pay the union's tab, and that someone is the union members. In order for the union to provide more pay and better benefits to its officers, more people have to pay. And that's where the union wants you to come in. Another reason unions are having such a difficult time is they're becoming a thing of the past. Years ago, when unions were more successful, people didn't mind putting the control of their future in the hands of an outside third party. They didn't mind being told when they should go on strike, or that the union decided not to process their grievance. But today, things are different. People want to have control over their own lives. The problem is, unions haven't changed. They still believe the same conditions that existed in 1930 or 1940 still exist today. They think today's worker and today's company are exactly like the workers and companies of the past. Labor unions are much like the dinosaurs who roamed the earth thousands of years ago. They can't adapt to today's world, and they're becoming extinct. And what about unionized companies? They're in terrible trouble. Take the automobile industry, for example. How many foreign cars were sold in the United States 25 years ago? Almost none. And how about today? Just take a look in the parking lot. Why did this happen? In unionized industries with restrictive work rules where the union is not interested in the success of the company, it is difficult, if not impossible, to compete in the world marketplace. But in non-unionized industries where everyone in the company can work together as a team, the future is bright. That's one of the reasons why so many large, predominantly non-union companies like IBM, Walmart, McDonald's, and Kodak are so successful. Employees in these companies have said no to unions. So rejecting unions is not only a good idea from a personal standpoint, it's one of the best ways to ensure a secure future. Continued stories about union corruption have also made it tough for unions to sign up new members. Employees today are simply not willing to trust their working lives to individuals who are only interested in feathering their own nest. Some people feel that stories about union corruption and unions being controlled by criminals are just fiction. But recently, Fortune magazine published an article entitled "The 50 Biggest Mafia Bosses, the Crime Business, Who Runs It, How They Manage It, Who Profits and Loses." The article lists the 50 biggest mafia bosses and tells where they get their money. Of the top 50 leaders of organized crime in the United States, 18 get a substantial portion of their income from unions, including 8 of the top 12. What does all this mean to us? Recently, a union has been trying to get our employees to vote for the union in a National Labor Relations Board election. You might be wondering what this election is all about and what will change if the union wins the election. First, in order to have an election, the union was required by law to obtain union authorization cards from at least 30% of the employees in the group they are seeking to represent. A union authorization card is a legal document. If you read the fine print, you will find that most union authorization cards are really membership applications to the union, and that once you sign the card, you have designated the union as your collective bargaining representative. Once the union has obtained the required number of cards, 30%, they give these cards to the National Labor Relations Board and petition for an election. The board then notifies the company that the union has petitioned, and if the unit the union has petitioned is a legal one, an election will be held. However, and this is very important, the election will be secret ballot. Everyone in the eligible unit can vote, whether or not they signed a card. And you can vote whatever way you choose. You can vote no against the union, even if you have signed a card. Now that you know why it's so important for the union to sign up new members, remember they need the money, and how they go about getting new members by trying to get people to vote for them in NLRB elections. Let's examine the question of your personal decision about your vote in the upcoming election. First, the National Labor Relations Act, the law that regulates union activities, gives you the legal right to vote for or against the union. But before you make that decision, let's look at some facts about unions, facts you need to know before you decide how to vote. When a union is attempting to get potential union members to vote for the union, a paid union organizer is usually assigned to the campaign. This paid union organizer may stand outside company property and hand out union literature, or may try to form committees of current employees to help him win votes. The organizer can legally promise employees anything: higher wages, better benefits, improved working conditions, less work, anything, in order to get a person to vote for the union. These promises are not illegal. A union organizer is a salesman. His job and his pay are based on his ability to get people to join his union. Just like any other salesman, he'll tell you only the things he thinks you want to hear in order to win your vote. Because the union wants your vote so badly, they may be willing to try and trick or deceive employees. Some of the tricks include: you could be asked to attend a union informational meeting. At that meeting, you'll be pressured to support the union. You could be told you're the only one in your group who hasn't decided to support the union and to get with the team. That usually isn't true. Many times the union organizers will try to get employees to get other employees to support the union. Some of their standard approaches include, do me a favor, help us get the union in. It could prove to be a very expensive favor. These repeated requests to support the union are made in the hope that eventually they'll wear you down. If you don't want to support the union, don't. Unfortunately, employees are sometimes told by other employees that if they don't support the union, their work relationship will suffer. Sometimes the approach is even more direct and threatening. Those threats may be illegal and certainly show the union's true colors. If you should feel threatened, you can bring that to the company's attention. They will take all appropriate actions to deal with it. But remember this, when a union wins an election designating the union as the collective bargaining representative, they win one right and one right only, the right to negotiate with the company. Nothing more, nothing less. The truth is, a union organizer can promise everything, but he cannot guarantee anything. If you'd like to prove to yourself that this statement is correct, ask a union organizer or someone who is pushing the union to give you a written guarantee that the union will get employees a certain amount of increase or a particular benefit, or that there will be no strikes. And if you really want to put the organizer to the test, ask him if the union will make up the difference if they're not able to keep their promise. When a union becomes the collective bargaining representative of a group of employees, all it means is that the union and the company will sit down at the bargaining table and negotiate. The union can ask the company for all the things the organizer promised you, but the company is not obligated to give anything other than what it feels it can afford to give or what it's willing to give. It's kind of like the game of let's make a deal. And when the deal is made, employees may wind up with more. They may wind up with less. Or they may wind up with the same thing they started with, plus having to pay union dues. The union knows this is true. That's why they can't guarantee you anything. Everyone should be very careful about believing what union organizers promise when they're trying to get people to vote for the union. The National Labor Relations Board, the government agency that regulates union organizing attempts, has stated very simply, collective bargaining is potentially hazardous for employees. And as a result of such negotiations, employees could possibly wind up with less benefits after unionization than before. So you can clearly see that designating a union as your collective bargaining representative is just a roll of the dice, but a roll with very high stakes. Another very important point people often forget when thinking about a union is the obligation union members have to the union. All union members are obligated to abide by the union constitution and bylaws of whatever union they join. Now, on the surface, this may not sound very important. But when you consider the restrictions and obligations union constitutions place on their members, it becomes very important. For example, did you know that union constitutions contain pages and pages of restrictions on their members' rights? They do. Did you know the Constitution of the United States is 7 pages long, while the Constitution of most unions is over 100 pages long and very fine print? And what's in all those pages? Let's take a look at some union constitutions and find out. Here's a provision talking about union dues. It states that dues can be increased from time to time at the union convention. Here's a provision talking about assessments. It states that whenever the union needs extra money, it can assess its members whatever amount is needed. Here's a provision talking about fines. It says a union member can be fined by the union whenever the union thinks the member stepped out of line. Here's a provision talking about trial. That's right, trials. It says a union member can be put on trial. Here's a provision talking about rules and regulations. One of the rules says that if you don't like the union and try to get it out, you can be put on trial and fined. Another rule says that if the union calls a strike and a member continues to work, that member can be put on trial and fined. But these are just examples. Remember, most union constitutions are over 100 pages long. 100 pages of rules, regulations, and restrictions on union members. When most people hear the word union, the first thing they think about is strikes. Unions are famous for them. But how do strikes happen? As we said earlier, when a union becomes the representative of a group of employees, it sits down with the company and the two sides bargain. But when they can't agree, there's really only one thing the union can do to try to make the company meet its demands, and that is call the employees out on strike. There are a few things about union strikes you need to know, things no union organizer will tell you. First of all, if you go out on strike for more money or better benefits, you receive no paycheck from the company, and your benefits are terminated. No paycheck and no benefits. Second, in most states, you cannot receive unemployment compensation. No unemployment compensation. And third, you can be permanently replaced. Yes, no matter what the union organizer may tell you, if you go out on economic strike, the company can hire permanent replacements to fill the jobs of the people who go out on strike. And when the strike is over, those replacements can keep those jobs as long as they want them. The National Labor Relations Board has put it very simply. An employer may permanently replace economic strikers. And if that's not enough reason to avoid strikes, there's the violence that so often goes along with union strikes. Friends become enemies, tempers flare, damage is done. Damage that sometimes can never be repaired. Frequently, union organizers try to convince employees that strikes are a rare occurrence. But let's look at the facts. According to the United States Department of Labor and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the government agencies who are responsible for monitoring union activities, including strikes, union strikes are a relatively common occurrence. For example, according to the Department of Labor, in the 4-year period between 1985 and 1988, employees missed 27,802,000 workdays because of strikes. Think about that. Over 27 million workdays. And it's very important to point out that these figures compiled by the Department of Labor include only those strikes involving 1,000 or more employees. Strikes involving less than 1,000 employees are not included in these figures. So as you can see, with a union, strikes are a very real possibility. A possibility you should consider when deciding how to vote. What about job security? Union organizers often try to get people to support the union with the promise that the union will provide everyone with job security. While most people will immediately realize that a union promise of job security is completely ridiculous, let's take a look at some facts. As we said earlier, union membership has declined dramatically in recent years. We've all seen television reports and newspaper articles about plants closing and massive layoffs in many parts of the country. What many people don't realize, however, is that many of these companies that have closed or had massive layoffs are unionized companies. So belonging to a union does not provide job security. But that's not the only way unions fail to provide job security. In states where they're legal, most union contracts contain what is called a union shop clause. A union shop clause requires every employee to join the union and remain a member of the union or be fired. Now, this is important to the union because they do not believe in letting the individual make up his own mind. They know that without this provision, many employees would not join the union, and they would not get that employee's money. And if you have any question about how important money is to the union, take a look at this letter from a major union to a company. The first paragraph of the letter states that an employee has failed to pay his dues on time. The second paragraph states, we therefore request that in accordance with the union contract, this employee be discharged. What does this tell you about the union? Whose security are they really interested in? So there you have it. What can a union really do for you? Strikes, dues, fines, assessments, constitutions and bylaws that restrict your rights as an individual, but they can't guarantee any improvements. So let us make our position on the union issue very clear. We do not want a union here. We feel more can be accomplished if we can continue to work together one-on-one, without union stewards, union officers, and without you having to pay union dues, fines, and assessments. But the company does not decide the issue of unionization. You decide the issue for yourselves. No one, either the company or the union officials, has the right to interfere with your free choice. We don't believe the union is in your best interest or in the company's. Our futures are all better served by working together toward a common goal, without the interference of an outside union whose interests are elsewhere. Support yourself. Support your future. Vote no. Job security. That's a subject unions frequently talk about during a union organizing campaign. They would like to try and convince you that with a union, you would have more job security than you have now. But what is job security? Where does it come from? And most important, can a union do anything at all to improve job security for its members? First, what is job security? Most people would define job security as the knowledge that they would never lose their job without a justifiable reason. No fear of layoffs. No fear their company would ever go out of business. In short, a secure feeling that as long as the company is strong and healthy and they do a good job, they will have a good job. If that definition of job security is correct, what can a union do to create or improve the job security of its members? Well, let's look at some facts. Unions do not create or maintain jobs. They don't get customer orders. They don't pay wages or provide benefits. Unions don't do any of these things. They cannot keep a company healthy. They cannot keep a company from laying off employees if business conditions warrant. They cannot help a company stay in business. In fact, many people feel unions do just the opposite, that they keep companies from being as successful as they could be. Let's look at some specific examples and see why the people who feel that unions cause job insecurity are probably right. First, there are a few numbers that should be considered. The United States Department of Labor consistently tracks changes in the rate of employment in the United States. We've all seen and read about the changes in the rate of employment. What many people don't know, however, is that the Labor Department also keeps track of employment rates by industry. Let's look at the recent changes in the employment rate by industry and compare unionized industries with non-unionized industries. In 1984, there were over 94.5 million people employed in the United States. Today, there are over 106 million people employed, an increase of 11,500,000 jobs, just over 12%. But how have unionized industries done during this same period? In the mining industry, one of the most heavily unionized industries in the United States, employment has declined by over 24%. Over 233,000 people have lost their jobs. In the basic steel industry, another of the most heavily unionized industries in the country, employment has declined by over 15%. Over 53,000 people have lost their jobs. In the automobile industry, another heavily unionized industry, employment has declined by about 1.5%. Over 12,000 people have lost their jobs. And in the textile and apparel industry, employment has declined by 5.6%. 108,000 people have lost their jobs. Yet, in non-union industries, employment has increased, and in some cases increased dramatically. In the service industry, for example, an industry with very little union representation, employment has increased by 16.3%. Over 3,300,000 new jobs had been created. So if a union tries to tell you that a union can prevent you from losing your job because of unfavorable business reasons, ask them how many unemployed union members there are in the steel industry. So unions can't provide job security because they can't do anything to keep a company or an industry healthy. But unions can do things to cause people to lose their jobs and even their way of life. Recently, a company called the Bunker Hill Mining Company, a silver mine, was operating in Kellogg, Idaho. The mine, whose employees were represented by a union, was not making a profit. The company that owned the mine decided to either close the mine, which would have put over 2,000 employees out of work, or try to sell the mine to another company. A local investment group agreed to purchase the mine and save the jobs of the employees. However, the group had to have the approval of the union in order to approve a new union contract and make the sale final. The union employees of the Bunker Hill Mine voted to accept the contract. But the International Union refused to abide by the vote of their local members and refused to sign the agreement. The International Union rejected the vote of its own members. A petition from some 1,300 employees denied the request of the governor of the state of Idaho and ignored the pleas of senators and members of Congress. Finally, because of the failure of the union to approve the new contract, the investment group was forced to withdraw their offer to purchase the mine, and the mine closed. Listen to what an employee of the mine and a union member had to say about the mine closing.
I'm an unemployed Bunker Hill mine worker, along with over 2,000 others due to the action of the union who did not honor the vote and wishes of its members. On January 17, 1982, all the union members of Bunker Hill Mining Company voted to accept a new contract which would allow a group of investors to purchase the Bunker Hill mine and allow us to keep our jobs. The new contract wasn't exactly what we wanted, but it was our only chance to keep our jobs, our homes, and our families fed and clothed. When we voted to accept the new contract, we went against the wishes of the International Union, located over 2,500 miles away in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We lost our constitutional rights that day. They allowed us to vote, but then, because it did not go their way, they said the vote was no good, and they would tell us what was good for us. What they told us was that we were better off out of work and on welfare. Today, most of the 2,000 former employees of Bunker Hill Mine have left the area. They were forced to sell out and move because there were no jobs here in Kellogg. The union has ruined the lives of thousands of people. Finally, I would say this to you. Keep control of your own lives and destiny. Keep control of your own money. Once a union has control, you will be dictated to and told what to do. And my experience is that what you will be told is what is best interest of the union and not what is in your own best interest. Unions do not provide job security. Just ask the over 2,000 people who used to work at Bunker Hill and are now out of work because of the union.
That's just one example of the union causing employees to lose their jobs. It's pretty dramatic. Over 2,000 people out of work because the union would not listen to its members. Does that sound like job security to you? It sure doesn't to me. But there are others which could affect you just as dramatically. Recently, a union newspaper carried a story about a strike at Western Brass Company. At the time of the story, the strike had lasted over 6 months and was still going on. When negotiations with the company broke down, the union called the employees out on strike. The average length of service of the strikers was 16 years, and at least 2 workers had more than 35 years of service. Now, the jobs of these workers have been filled by permanent replacements. The union, instead of trying to work with the company to solve the problems which led to the breakdown of negotiations, declared a boycott against the company. This means that the union is attempting to try to keep people from buying the products manufactured by the company. They're trying to put the company out of business. They're trying to destroy the jobs of their members. Not only are the employees out of work now, if the union has their way, there will never be a job for them to come back to. Again, This sure doesn't sound like a union trying to provide job security for its members. Another example of unions creating job insecurity occurred in Charlotte, North Carolina, when a union won a representation election at Edgecombe Metals Company. Following the election, the union and the company met in an attempt to negotiate a contract that was acceptable to both sides. The company and the union negotiated for over 9 months without reaching an agreement. A major issue the two sides could not agree to was dues checkoff, the provision which provides for the company to automatically withhold dues from each employee's paycheck. The union wanted the company to withhold dues. The company said no. After 9 months of negotiations, the union called a strike. After the strike began, the company exercised its legal right and hired permanent replacements for all the employees who went out on strike. After the strike began, the company and the union continued to negotiate, and the company continued to operate the business with the permanent replacements. After another 6 months of negotiations, the union finally realized the company was not going to agree to the dues checkoff provision and the many promises the union made to the employees during the campaign. Finally, 15 months after the election, the union withdrew representation. They walked away, leaving the employees who had supported the union and gone out on strike without anything. No job, no pay, no benefits. They had no concern for the future or the welfare of these individuals. Now, what happened here? The union won an election. They couldn't get a guarantee that they could collect their dues. They called the employees out on strike. They caused the employees to lose their jobs, some with over 30 years of service. And then they walked away. What does that tell you about the union? But these three cases are just examples of a union causing entire groups of employees to lose their jobs. What about individuals and companies that aren't on strike or in some other kind of trouble? Can the union cause job insecurity in those kinds of companies? You bet. Here's a typical union contract containing a provision entitled Union Security or Union Shop. In some states, this provision is illegal, but in most states where it is legal, you'll find a clause like this in almost every union contract. The clause states that in order for a person to keep their job, they must become a member and remain a member of a union. If they don't become a member of the union, or if they fail to pay their dues after they become a member, the union can require the company to fire the employee. This clause is extremely important to the union because they know that most people who know what a union can and cannot do and who have a choice would not belong to a union. This clause does nothing to provide job security to the individual. And if you think the union would never use this clause to cause a person to be fired, think again. It happens all the time. Here's a letter from a major union to a company in which the union represents the employees. We've seen this letter before in one of our earlier presentations, but I want you to look at it again because it vividly shows what unions are really interested in. The first paragraph of the letter states that an employee has failed to pay his dues on time. The second paragraph states, we therefore request that in accordance with the union contract, the employee be discharged. What does this tell you about the union? Whose security are they really interested in? Incidentally, while this contract spends almost 2 pages talking about union security, there's not one provision that mentions employee security. Speaking of union contracts, let's look at a few and see what they actually say about job security. Here's a provision that talks about preferential seniority, or what some people call super seniority. Preferential seniority or super seniority means that union committeemen and union stewards are artificially given more seniority than anyone in the company or department where they work. What this means is that in case of a layoff, people with more seniority than the union officials would be laid off, while the union officials would be allowed to keep their jobs. Whose job security is the union really interested in? It's pretty obvious. They're more interested in their special friends than they are the majority of employees. Here's a provision that provides for job restrictions for employees. Job restriction means that if work is slow in your area, you would not be permitted to move to other work or do other jobs. Unions often try to restrict your work to one task. Most people feel they benefit by being moved to other work when their regular work is not available. Sometimes the work available may not be work you'd want to do for a long period of time, but most people would prefer to continue to work at something rather than be laid off. But under many union contracts, if work was slow in your department, you'd be out of work. Some union contracts are so strict that companies are forced to lay people off out of one area or department while they're hiring people into other areas or departments. No work, no pay. Is this job security? Of course not. Is job security paying another bill every month? This you don't need. Surely there are better uses for your money than paying union dues. For example, if you're 35 years old and invested $10 a month in a passbook savings account, you would have this much money at age 65. If the same money were invested in union dues, you would have nothing. Dues cannot buy job security. Here's a provision called the Management Rights Clause. It's important for everyone to understand that almost every contract in the United States contains a provision very much like this one. This clause defines what rights the management of the company retains even though a labor contract is in effect. This clause states the company retains the right to hire, fire, classify, suspend, promote, release for lack of work, discharge for proper cause or other legitimate reason, and evaluate as to ability. The company also has the right to determine products to be manufactured, plan and schedule production, set standards, methods, processes, and means of production, and enforce all rules and regulations. If the company maintains all these rights, it kind of makes you wonder what rights the union gains and why people would be willing to pay a union to represent them, doesn't it? Some of you may be thinking, well, maybe the union doesn't provide job security, but at least with the union, I'll get more pay and have better benefits. Think again. For several years now, non-union employees have been receiving larger pay increases and better benefit improvements than people who are represented by a union. According to the United States Department of Labor, the raises negotiated by unions for their members recently have been averaging between 1.5% and 3%. That's right, between 1.5% and 3%. And in the manufacturing industry, unions have been doing even worse. In manufacturing, some recent union settlements have actually resulted in wage reductions. On the other hand, employees in non-union companies have been doing much better, receiving pay increases 2 to 3 times the amounts received by union members. Less job security, smaller wage increases, or even wage cuts, strikes, the chance the union can have you fired if you fail to pay your dues, granting super seniority to union stewards and committeemen, job restrictions. All these items are parts of your life when you belong to a union. So unions do not provide job security. In fact, without a union, you have more job security than any union could possibly provide. The opportunity to help make both yourself and your company successful by doing your very best. The opportunity to advance on merit rather than by being a union committeeman or steward. The chance to work together with the management of this company to outperform other companies in this industry. More job security and a better future, period, without a union. Vote for yourself, your family, and your future. Vote no. Collective bargaining. That's a subject you hear a lot about during a union organizing campaign. But what is collective bargaining? What does the term mean? And what, if anything, is its importance to you and to the union who's trying to win the right to become your legal representative? First, what is collective bargaining? Well, collective bargaining simply means that when a union is the legally elected representative of a group of employees, the law requires both the company and the union to negotiate over wages, hours, and working conditions. Now, the key word here is negotiate. When a union any union wins a National Labor Relations Board representation election, all they win is the right to negotiate with a company. Nothing more, nothing less. The union can promise you anything, try to lead you to believe anything. But the truth is, all a union wins is the right to negotiate. Some people think that when a union wins an election and starts bargaining with the company, all wages and benefits you currently have will be the starting point, and everything will be negotiated up from there. This is simply not true. While no one can predict what the outcome of negotiations would be, the fact is all wages, benefits, and other terms and conditions of employment, those you have now, as well as those the union has promised you or implied you would get, are subject to negotiation. During a union organizing campaign, the union's chief tactic is the big promise, or at least the illusion of the big promise. No one would vote for a union or agree to pay union dues if they didn't believe they would get more money, better benefits, or improved working conditions. And certainly no one would vote for a union if they thought they could suffer a wage decrease or lose benefits. So it's the job of the union organizer to try to convince the voters in an election that by voting for the union, things will only improve, and the money the union will cost the employees is a good investment. Some organizers will even go so far as to promise or guarantee improved wages, benefits, or working conditions. But the fact is, the only thing a union gets when it wins an election is the right to negotiate. Following any union election victory, the union is certified as the collective bargaining representative of the voting unit for a period of 1 year. During that year, the company must meet with the union at reasonable times and reasonable places for the purpose of collective bargaining. At these meetings, the union can make proposals, and if the company doesn't agree with those proposals, it may reject them or make counter-proposals, even if those counter-proposals may contain lower wages, fewer benefits, and less favorable working conditions than existed before the election. The company is not legally required to sign a union contract at all, even after negotiating at great length and making every effort to reach an agreement. No company is ever required to agree to union demands it considers unfair or unreasonable. And any change in wages, benefits, or working conditions depends strictly on the outcome of negotiation, not what the union or people supporting the union have promised or implied. As we stated earlier, no one can predict what the outcome of negotiations would be. But just think for a minute about the things you've heard and read about recent union contract negotiations. Many union contract negotiations today result in what are called concessionary agreements, in which the union settles for lower wages and fewer benefits. These kinds of agreements are not just the exception, they're common. What this means is that unions are now settling for less and less, not just in first contracts, but in other contract negotiations as well. According to the Department of Labor, wages and benefits rose an average of 2.8% in the first year of collective bargaining contracts negotiated during the first quarter of 1985. Over 173,000 employees were covered by the major agreements reached during this period. Approximately 37,000 of these workers accepted pay freezes, and about 10,000 workers took pay cuts. What all this means very simply is this: if the union wins the election, the company and the union would sit down at the bargaining table and negotiate. The union would probably ask the company for all the things it's promised you or implied that you would receive if they won the election. But make no mistake about it, the company is free to say no to any union demand it feels is not in the best interest of the company or the employees. It's sort of like the television game show, Let's Make a Deal. And when the deal is made, you could wind up with more. You could wind up with the same thing you started with. Or you could wind up with less. The union is aware of the fact that if most people voting in the election are aware of these facts, they will probably vote against the union. Therefore, they will probably tell you that negotiations will begin with a base of your current wages and benefits and can only be negotiated up from there. Just so you'll have no misunderstanding about exactly what the facts are, Here's some information you should consider. The National Labor Relations Board has stated on many occasions that collective bargaining is a two-way street. In one case, the board stated, the obligation to bargain collectively does not compel either party to agree to a proposal or require the making of a concession. In another case, the board said, there is, of course, no obligation on the part of an employer to contract to continue all existing benefits, nor is it unfair labor practice to offer reduced benefits. And perhaps most clearly, the board has declared collective bargaining is potentially hazardous for employees. And as a result of such negotiations, employees could possibly wind up with less benefits after unionization than before. What all this means is the union cannot guarantee that if the union wins the election, anything will improve. In fact, it means that if the union wins the election, there's no guarantee you'll be able to keep the same things you have now. Your wages and benefits could go down. This is the truth, regardless of what the union might tell you. Now, let's look at some facts. When a union is conducting an organizing campaign at a company, one or more union organizers are assigned to try to sell the employees on the idea that a union is their best opportunity to gain improvements in wages, benefits, and working conditions. Sell is exactly the right word, because that's what a union organizer is, a salesman. He's a paid employee of the union, whose job is to convince employees to vote for his union. He may even be on commission, meaning the more people he recruits, the more money he makes. And just like any other salesman, he'll try to convince you to buy his product by pointing out what he feels to be the good points about unions in general and his union in particular. If you go to a car salesman to buy a new car, you don't expect that salesman to point out any of the bad features of the car he's trying to sell you. Well, a union organizer is just like a car salesman. He'll only tell you the things he thinks you want to hear in order to try and win your vote. Let's look at some of the things unions say or imply in order to try to win the votes of people they're trying to organize. 1, higher wages. This is probably the most frequently used union campaign tactic. The illusion that with a union, employees will make more money. First, as we've stated earlier in this presentation, unions who win elections win only the right to negotiate with a company, nothing else. During these negotiations, a union can ask the company for more money, but the company can say no. And that is all the union can do is ask. But as you can see, there's no law that requires the company to increase wages or even to keep your wages at the same level they are now. 2, better benefits. Another popular union campaign promise is that with a union, you'll have better benefits than you have now. The same thing we talked about concerning higher wages also holds true here. The union can talk about better benefits, but the truth is they can only ask. And the company can always say no or propose a benefit level that is less than what you have now. 3, better working conditions. While the union can again promise improvements, they cannot guarantee them. In fact, many people feel that working conditions get worse when a union wins an election, particularly when it comes to getting problems solved. With a union, all problems must go through a network of union committeemen, union stewards, and other various union officials. This means more red tape, delays, and decisions about your personal problems made for political reasons rather than based upon the facts of your individual case. Let's take a look at an actual case and see what happened to one group of employees who believed union promises and voted for the union. A union was trying to organize a company in San Antonio, Texas. The employees listened to the promises of the union organizer and voted the union in. During the course of the negotiations, the employees lost much of what they had before the union won the right to become their collective bargaining agent. Later, many of the employees wanted to know what had happened. The owner of the company responded to the employees in this letter. Let me read a part of this letter to you, and I quote, "Our employees fell for the union promises and voted to go union. Here's what happened after that. The companies rejected all the union's demands and submitted their own contract to the union. In the end, the union finally accepted the company's contract. With regard to wages, the highest paid employees received considerably less than the union had promised. In fact, only a handful of employees were classified as journeymen. The remaining employees were slotted into lower paying apprentice classifications. The important point, however, is what happened to fringe benefits. Before the union came in, employees enjoyed numerous benefits, including paid holidays, paid vacations, group hospitalization, life insurance, profit sharing, annual bonus, and more. When the negotiations ended, the employees had lost every existing benefit through the course of collective bargaining. Those employees learned the hard way that union promises don't mean anything. They learned that if a union wins an election, everything is subject to negotiation. A similar case happened in Orlando, Florida. A group of employees voted in a union. Following the victory, a contract was negotiated between the company and the union. Here is what some of the employees who were involved in that situation had to say about the union promises. 1, higher wages. A, I paid union dues to lose money. B, we lost a pay raise. C, all a union can do is cost us money. D, our annual raise was delayed by 7 months while the union negotiated a contract. E, the union failed miserably to bring about additional benefits, pay raises, and more as they had promised. F, one employee I know of lost enough money in 1 month to make their house payment, all due to the union. G, our rate of wage increase was going down instead of up. H, the union promised raises they couldn't deliver. I, we had more before the union came in than after. 2, better benefits. A, the union said we'd have more and better benefits, but the contract was ridiculous. B, the only ones that benefited were the stewards. C, they promised better benefits. When they got in our plant and we asked about these things, their answer was, don't bother us with penny-ante things like this. D, they promise to make things better for you, but they'll do nothing for you except make things harder on you. E, they failed miserably to bring about additional benefits. F, when it came right down to the bare facts, the union did not get us any more raise, insurance, sick pay, vacation, or holidays. G, when the first contract was negotiated and signed, the employees lost some of the benefits we already had. H, we were promised in union meetings we would have dental insurance, but we never did get it. I, the union promised to up wages, better benefits, better working conditions. The rest of the story is a joke. There are many other cases like these, so don't be misled. When people vote for a union, they really do gamble with their future. By now, you may be asking yourself, how can this happen? How can a union agree to a contract that provides for less than the employees had before the union came in? Like we've said, collective bargaining is a matter of negotiation. When negotiations begin, there are really 3 parties involved: the company, the union, and the employees. Each party is interested in obtaining the best possible deal. The company is interested in maintaining all rights to operate the business as economically as possible. The employees are interested in obtaining the best levels of pay, benefits, and working conditions. The union is interested in protecting its financial position by assuring that all employees it represents are members and pay dues. When the union submits its proposals to the company, they always ask for dues checkoff, and where legal, union security clauses. The dues checkoff provision requires the company to deduct union dues from the paychecks of employees and submit that amount in a lump sum to the union each month. This ensures the union will get its money without having to go through a collection process and without having to face members who may be unhappy with the union. The union security clause requires all eligible employees to become and remain members of the union in order to keep their jobs. If any of these people don't pay their dues, the union can force the company to fire them. These 2 clauses are very important to a union. Without them, they cannot be assured of collecting their dues from the employees. When the union submits these proposals, the company has the opportunity to say, yes, we accept these. No, we don't accept these. Or would you like to trade something the employees have now in order to obtain checkoff and union security? Since collective bargaining is always a situation of give and take, many unions have given away benefits the employees had before the union came in for something that only benefited the union, such as checkoff or union security. This is one way employees often wind up with less after a union contract than they had before. There are, of course, many others. You may also be saying to yourself, well, maybe the union can ask us to accept a contract that contains less wages, fewer benefits, and less desirable working conditions in order to get some of the things they want, but we certainly don't have to accept the union's proposed contract. We can always go on strike to get what we want. And that statement is true. However, we'll be giving you some important information about strikes in our next presentation. Information that will show you why strikes are not usually a good idea. The main thing to remember is that a union will glorify the benefits of union membership and tell you only one side of the story. It's legal for them to make promises and try to lead people to believe that with a union, employees will make more money or have better benefits. But today, these union stories are falling on deaf ears. The facts speak more loudly and more clearly than ever before. Unions can promise, but they can't deliver. More and more employees are rejecting unions in elections where unions are trying to get in. According to National Labor Relations Board statistics, on elections held to get unions in, unions lost 53.5% in 1984, up from 52.3% in 1983. And more employees are decertifying unions, kicking them out where they're already in. NLRB statistics show that in elections held to get rid of unions in 1984, employees voted 76.4% of the time to get rid of their union, up from 74.4% in 1983. Today, unions represent fewer employees as a percentage of the workforce than at any other time in the last 40 years. Union membership represented 32.5% of the workforce in 1954 and has been declining ever since, so that today only 17% of the workforce are union members. Less than 1 in 5 American workers belong to a union. Remember, unions can legally promise you anything, but delivery on those promises is another story. Unfortunately, a story they won't tell you until it's too late. Unions can't guarantee you anything. They know that collective bargaining is a give-and-take process, and that recently unions have given more than they've taken. Think about it. What can a union really do for you? Vote no. When people think about unions or when they're considering how to vote in a union organizing election, they sometimes forget a very important point. The point they frequently forget is that when people become union members, they're required to abide by a set of rules and regulations established by the union to control many of the activities of their members. The way unions establish and enforce the activities of their members is to create what unions call their constitutions. All international unions have constitutions, and in addition, most local unions have bylaws, which are rules and regulations in addition to the International Union Constitution. What this means is that as a union member, you lose many of the rights you now have as an employee, and you give those rights to the union. Also, your activities as an employee will be governed by the many provisions of the Union Constitution and bylaws. The fact is that all union members are obligated to abide by the Constitution and bylaws of whatever union they join. Now, some people may think all this is not very important, but when you carefully consider the restrictions and obligations union constitutions and bylaws place on their members, it becomes very important. So let's take a look at some typical union constitutions and examine some of the provisions contained in these constitutions to see how you can be directly affected. Here is a typical union constitution. It's 101 pages long in very small print. Some constitutions are a little shorter, some much longer, but this one is fairly typical. Now let's compare this Union Constitution with the Constitution of the United States of America, the document which grants all of us the basic freedoms we enjoy so much as citizens of this country. The Constitution of the United States of America is 7 pages long. 7 pages. And this includes all the amendments that have been added since the Constitution was adopted